Hello there, Atomics! Planet Coaster 2 is finally out, and I wanted to briefly tell you my thoughts about the game while also showing off a park I started building. Now, I will say right out of the gate, I am not one of those people who make jaw-dropping, hyper-detailed masterpieces in Planet Coaster like Silverette, but I wanted to see how nice I can make it as a more average player, hoping my experience with Roller Coaster Tycoon, The Sims, Planet Coaster 1, and just drawing for a living might let me make something that looks nice at least, while also showing other people who are more average at it what they can do. I decided to really lean into it and put in more effort than I typically would though, and see how it turns out. I wanted to make a Wild West park, possibly a water park. I don't typically have any sort of connection to Wild West as a setting, but leading up to the release of the game, I saw a million people complaining that the original themes that were in Planet Coaster 1, Wild West, Fantasy, Sci-Fi, and Pirate, are not in Planet Coaster 2, and every time I saw how big of a deal people made of it all, I was like, why? Because I was certain that you could still make those things with the pieces in the game, they just come a little less pre-packaged. We already saw that a sci-fi theme is possible by repurposing the game's aquatic and resort themes, so I wanted to prove that building a Wild West park is totally possible as well, even without a specifically Western theme, and see how easy it is or isn't. After which, I figured I'd upload the various buildings I created to the workshop so people who missed the old Wild West theme but still want it out of the box can also have it. And that's what we're seeing right now. I decided to start off with a main street, that typical one street you would see in Wild West towns in movies, which would double as a main street for the park with all the stores and services you find at a park entrance. First, I wanted there to be a guest services building, which is what you're seeing here. And off the bat, it was really going well. There were, in fact, plenty of wooden pieces for both walls and roofs that I could utilize, and the support pillars from the Viking theme were really working double duty. The first big difference I noticed, I actually wasn't expecting. Because I knew this would be a park shared with others, I found myself having to care about building interiors, since first-person camera view is now a thing in the game. Whereas in Planet Coaster 1, all I had to do was build a nice facade, and what's inside didn't really matter. Yes, I know Planet Coaster 1 technically had a cheat that lets you use first-person camera view, and that a lot of people would still spend time on the interiors of buildings, but again, I usually just built for myself, and now the first-person camera view is actually integrated into the game itself, so that was a little harder to ignore. That's where I first felt myself struggling a bit, because while the Wild West architecture is very easy to recreate in the game, shockingly so even, it was the little details and props that were a little harder to get right. Not impossible, mind you, I still found some bits and pieces that I could repurpose, mostly from the Vikings theme, but I'll admit that's one place that was a little more difficult than I expected. Everything else, though, went really smooth. But that made me realize that now that first-person view is more of a thing in the game, I'd love to see more interior pieces like furniture added as scenery items. I want to apologize if there's a few skips in the video here and there, between Planet Coaster 2 being a new game fresh out of the box and occasionally crashing, with thankfully a very good autosave that made sure I didn't lose too much work, Steam having a brand new recording feature that I used to make this video that is also new and occasionally crashing, and me just being forgetful and forgetting to hit record, there may be some small bits missing here and there. Which I guess brings me to the next thing. How is the game? My first impressions. Well, as I described to a friend, on one hand, it feels a bit like an early access game with some bugs and jank that need to be fixed, and definitely still needs quite some more time in the oven before it feels ready and polished. On the other hand, man, even while it's baking, it smells so good. I have to fight the controls a little, but I end up with some really cool things I'm happy with. I encounter a feature that doesn't sit right with me, only to hear that Frontier's already publicly committed to updating it very soon to be more like how I want it to be. There's a lot to get used to that just flows differently than in the first game, which takes some adjusting, but at the same time, there's lots of little improvements and things that made me go, ah, that's nice! Like buildings and scenery pieces now being in one menu instead of being separated into two. Also, credit where credit is due, the game runs like a freaking charm on my ancient 2016 gaming rig. 2016! That's ancient in computer terms, but it runs flawlessly. There's still a lot of stuff to improve and issues to fix, and if you're holding off on buying the game, I definitely think a month and a half down the line it should already be a much better one, or if you're short on cash and you're not already foaming at the mouth, there's no reason to smash that piggy bank just yet until we get a few more updates and there's a sale, but the fact I already have 26 hours on a game that came out just a few days ago is probably a good sign. I definitely don't regret having it right away. I could not have waited. Like I said, it may not be fully baked yet, but this cake smells good. When you think back to Planet Coaster 1, it's crazy to realize how many things we associate with it were actually added in future updates and were not there on release. Scenario editor, theme maker's toolkit, custom billboards, restaurants and hotels, etc, etc. And while, yeah, Frontier, you already had those in the first game, kinda weird you don't have it in the second one. I get that you rebuilt the game from scratch, but there's gotta be some overlap in the code that would have saved you some work in putting them in the game on release. You already have the assets. But it just makes me realize that Planet Coaster 1 wasn't what we think of it on release either, and turned better and better with each update. And Planet Coaster 2 is doing the same thing. So my suggestion is, treat Planet Coaster 2 as an early access game. Still needs ironing, but on the right track. And you get to play with it now instead of having to wait until, let's say, a few months from now when everything is ironed out. If that sounds good to you, great. If not, just wait out a bit longer. Frontier has surprised me with how communicative they've been about things that bother the community and how much they're on the right track. Which I'll talk about more as I start building a general store, which sells hats and souvenirs, using the straw hats instead of cowboy hats. So, 2 days before the game's release, Frontier already addressed some concerns the community had, and just a day or two after release, they had a similar announcement, promising to tackle some of the community's biggest issues and requested features, such as separate load or unload stations, or promising to look into fixing waterslide physics and the limits on how many guests you can have. It still remains to see just how they'll tackle all that, but the fact they're addressing it means they're listening. They value community input, make it a priority to address it, and value the player experience over pretending like their game is flawless already. I love this attitude. It bodes well for the future of the game, and it managed to bring back a lot of hype I had about where this game is going, which I lost when I realized Scenario Editor isn't on the game on release. But most importantly, the best thing about this attitude is that it proves those people on Reddit were wrong for telling the complainers to shut up. It's our complaints that are telling the devs what needs to be adjusted, and the game is going to be better for it. As long as it's done in constructive, non-toxic manner anyway. I'm still not on board with people acting like Frontier has personally attacked them because the restraints on that one coaster are different. But enough about the future of it. Let's talk more about what it can do right now. As you can see, I built a really cute general store, and while I heard a lot of people complain that signs you can edit aren't in the game, I think those people ignore that we still have signs. They've just been separated into two pieces, background piece and text. It has both pros and cons. Cons, it was much easier, faster, and simpler to use the old signs where you just place down a piece, type in text, and it magically adjusts to fit the sign even if it's shaped funny. Pros, the new way allows for much more control over how things look, where they're placed, and it means that anything can be a sign. Ideally, I'd love to see both options merged, with the ability to just click a sign and put it in text, or use the new text tool on it to write anything anywhere. I found myself using pieces from all the other themes to make the Western one, with bulky wooden beams or crates from the Viking theme, more artistic wooden archways made from the resort theme's bamboo, and old-timey lamps from the same kit, as well as a mishmash of details and trims from the regular theme kit. And since I'm not used to building anything hyper-detailed, I was very happy that Old West buildings tend to be on the boxy side, which lends itself well to Planet Coaster's grid, which, by the way, is so comfortable to work with now. Not that it was broken before, but it took me a while to get the hang of it in the first game. Planet Coaster 2, it was much more straightforward. Now all you have to do is click a building while holding a scenery piece and it switches over to editing that building instead. One click, bam, no hassle, no fuss. No annoying confirmation window. Love that. Next I wanted a train station in my little town, as that is something you'd find in both a Wild West town and a big Parks Main Street, so I started building that using images from Google as reference. It ended up being one of my favorite buildings in Parks Main Street. And while I love the game's new family transport trains, they might even be my favorite thing about the new game, I chose to go with the more traditional train that actually looks like a big train because I felt that would be most fitting to a Wild West train station. You'd notice I built the park's path as very wide using the path edit tool because I saw in some videos that guests tend to crowd and clump together and I wanted to make sure there's plenty of space. As for the station, I wanted there to be one side next to the queue line where you would supposedly buy tickets, an area where you enter the platform, and a freight area off to the other side where a bunch of cargo is stored. I used the resort bamboo pieces for slightly more decorative curved wooden supports, the old-timey resort lamps made a comeback, and eventually I'll also add in the banners from the Viking theme as an improvised flag color decoration. I'm also about to build a clock at the top of the station, which is maybe one of the only times in this build that I actually struggled with architecture a bit, as getting it to look good was a bit of a challenge, especially since I couldn't find a good replacement for the arrows, but I did eventually do right by it, I think. Speaking of issues, let's take advantage of Frontier being so great at listening to the community and talk about some things that bug me that I still haven't seen addressed. Staff management is kind of awful right now. It's split into two different windows. The only thing accessible from the staff menu is their schedule, but for anything regarding who's doing what right now, where are they, how much they're paid, etc., that's only visible through the park management screen, which is somewhere else entirely. That's bad UI. Please fix it. It took me ages to realize how to even do all those other things because I just couldn't find them. I keep getting notices that the maintenance badge on this ride or that ride has run out. Meanwhile, I'm pretty sure I have like 12 mechanics wandering the park looking for work, so I'm just like, why? I don't know what the cause of that is, and the game doesn't really make it easy to find out. Would love to see this addressed. Also, power management is a bit more of a pain than I thought it would be. I would think since how much power you have in your park affects how many rides you can have open, that there would be a place to easily see how much power you're generating versus how much power the park is currently using. If that's a thing, I still haven't seen it. Ride ticket prices can be set as bargain priced, premium priced, or dynamic. Meanwhile, I have no idea how dynamic works, what affects it, or how I should set the prices for it. There's a new mechanic of guests entering and leaving your park altogether to mimic the flow of guests going in and out of a park at the start and end of each day, but sometimes it feels like it happens out of nowhere for no clear reason that has nothing to do with what time it is in your park, and while it's a good idea in principle, I feel like it doesn't quite stick the landing. Guests sometimes avoid entire areas of the park or certain rides completely, and I can't tell if that's a bug or if it's weather related. I feel like if it's weather related, the game should probably let me know a bit more. I read somewhere that weather does in fact affect which rides guests prefer to go on, favoring covered rides, but I haven't really noticed it in the game, and I wouldn't have been able to tell if I hadn't read it somewhere. And I'm still not sure if covered means the rides that come naturally covered, like merry-go-rounds, or if I built a roof over my roller coaster, does it suddenly count as covered? Come to think of it, I looked for a heat map showing me what counts as covered and just couldn't find one. But to offset those things with something positive, I love that Sandbox is more versatile than ever, letting you choose between a whole lot of things that you can toggle on and off, more so than in the first game. This basically means that we have multiple sandbox modes, ranging from full creative to more management-based. Excellent move. Here you can see me cluttering up the station with more small details to give it that extra touch, adding a sign on top with the town's name, and by extension the station's name, which I thought about for a while and eventually decided it should be Cactusville, because not every Wild West amusement park has to have Frontier in the name. And then it was time to tackle the main street itself. I felt it was a bit barren and lacked in things that give off shadows, so I decided to fill it out a bit, but I couldn't decide yet on how because I didn't want to add trees to preserve that semi-desert frontier feel, so I improvised. Then it was time to build the bank, because no Wild West town is complete without it. If there were ATMs in the game, I'd hide them inside, but as of right now, they are not included in the game, so I decided the bank shall be strictly decorative. Once again, the Viking building pieces came in very handy. There's no way to go into it since it's purely a facade, so thankfully that saved me a lot of interior designing. I did try to make sure there's some space between each building in the town, though, to make it feel more realistic and less grid-based. I don't know if those porches on the front of buildings connect in real-world Wild West towns like a sidewalk, or if each building kind of has its own separate porch, but luckily I'm not building a real town here, I'm building a town-shaped theme park, so screw historical accuracy, I build what I want. It's a theme park, there's gonna be some inaccuracies. The lack of realism is realistic. I scattered some wheatgrass at the front of the town, scaled up so it feels like an actual wheat field to give that town the historical feel, but I should probably add in some kind of park gate at some point, though I still haven't decided on how I want it to look and what would work best with the way the park looks right now. I actually kind of like that right now there isn't a big old park-looking structure there and that it looks like a small town just sitting out in the middle of a field out in Arizona or whatever, but I'll probably add in something there at some point. Next, it was time for possibly the biggest challenge. Possibly the biggest staple of any Wild West town is the saloon. I knew it needed to be a corner piece because, I don't know, most saloons I've seen are built on corners for whatever reason and have a diagonal wall that you enter from. This was going to be a pain in the butt since the game doesn't actually have diagonal building pieces. I had to create a separate building built at a 45-degree angle and improvised a lot, which is where it really came in handy how easy it is to switch between editing different buildings now. It almost wasn't even an issue. Would still be easier if we had diagonal pieces though, just saying. Just because of the length difference. I also wasn't sure how to place it, because if I placed it in the street, that would create a path going off in a 90-degree angle, which would be a bit weird, since rather than choosing to go right or left, as you do in a lot of real parks, and having the path loop through the entire building area, if I placed the saloon regularly, it would cause a T-junction where guests either continue straight forward or go left, and the entire park ends up being built on just one side, feeling lopsided. So I decided instead to have the saloon be a centerpiece building built at the end of the path at an angle to divide the main path into two, one going right and the other to the left. This would also make it a central location where guests can go to eat or drink no matter where they are. Lastly, to finish up the main street, I felt like it was still missing something, and decided to add a water tower between the saloon and the train station. I knew there's water towers in the game, but I wanted one that felt more rustic. I wanted the roof to hang over the edges of the tower basin and be slightly bigger than it, but at first I couldn't get it to work since there were no curved roof trims, and none of the other pieces I tried to improvise with really got me a result I was satisfied with. So after quite a while of experimentation, I eventually decided to leave it as is for now and move on to the tower supports. I was hoping for something ready-make I could just scale up, but pretty quickly I realized I may have to build the dang thing myself, so this is one place where I guess I'd accept that it would be nicer to have some pre-built Wild West pieces, though I still maintain that the lack thereof did not keep me from making a fairly Wild Western looking area after all. I decided I wasn't happy with the way the basin looked and decided if I can't expand the roof, I'd instead shrink the basin, and while most scenery pieces in the game can be scaled, wall pieces cannot. So at first I experimented with other ways to make the basin, but when nothing really came out the way I wanted it to, I instead chose to use the original curved wall pieces I selected and just move them into each other so they clipped but created a smaller shape. This gave the basin some weird ridges, but I figured that it just looks like wooden pieces meant to hold the basin together without bursting, and decided that instead of trying to hide it, I'd add metal strips to them to make it look intentional. Kitsugi, yay. I placed between the train station, because that's where you'd find a lot of water towers, and the Spicy Vanguard, which is what I decided to name the saloon. Unfortunately, building the interior of the saloon is one place where I forgot to press record, but you'll see it in a minute when I show everything off at the end of the video. With the ground floor being where guests sit to eat or drink, and the top floor, usually reserved for places to sleep, being reserved for a staff rest area. I wanted it to actually be functional and accessible, which meant building a huge staircase that unfortunately took up most of the space I had and made everything else a little cramped. And it's only now, while I'm recording this, that I'm realizing that I could have probably used the new Edit Path tool to make it narrower and take up less space. See, I'm still thinking a bit like Planet Coaster 1. But, oh well, I still like how it came out. If I had built the supports to be completely vertical, that would have probably made things a whole lot easier for me, but I wanted them to be slightly sloped inwards because that's more realistic. Working with a reference picture is very helpful on one hand, but it also comes with a dose of, dang it, I didn't realize I'd have to do all that. I do low-key love how it turned out though. I'll probably add in more details to this area later on, but I definitely accomplished what I set out to do. I do think it's kind of weird the game doesn't come with any cactus plants that are like, you know, the cartoony kind with the arm. It's especially weird since there's a mascot in the game that's that kind of cactus. But anyway, yeah, once I finished the water tower, I felt like the core of Main Street was more or less done, and next up would be the rides, which should be their own video. I really want to make this a Wild West themed water park because I don't think I've ever actually seen anything like that, which is weird because Wild West is a very common theme in a lot of theme parks around the world. I'm sure if there is one though, someone will be happy to correct me. So welcome to Cactusville. This is the main street that we just built. Over there are the bathrooms because a lot of times that's the first place you need to go when you get to a park. And over there is guest services, which is a little crowded right now. This is what it looks like. It's a staff-only area, so we will not be going into there. Upstairs is off limits. We go out of here. The general store and bank. This is the Cactusville train station. You would go in line here and pass by the water tower and the cargo hold. Here you would get your tickets at the ticket booth and go up to the platform. Interesting thing I noticed, I don't know if it's on purpose, but Planet Coaster 2 lets you place like benches and trash bins and stuff on station platforms. I guess because they're technically paths. So this is where you would take the train once we have one. And everything that's far away is blurry. I know I can turn that off with the field of vision thing. I choose not to. Now let's go into the Spicy Vanguard Saloon. So through the doors, it sells food and drinks here, and there's an upstairs and a bathroom. Now, it sells vegan food and lattes, which, you know, anyone with any sort of, like, Wild West or Southern heritage would beat me up for selling in a Wild West saloon, but it's my park, I do what I want. So you can sit down, have some food, have a drink, and if you're staff only, then you can go upstairs to the break room. Ooh. Oh. Hello. He's in the back rooms, just staring into the void. I've been there, man. Anyway, yeah, so that's Cactusville. Hope you enjoyed my video. If you enjoyed it, please let me know. Not because of the algorithm or anything, I just genuinely want to know what you think, because, you know, your comments help push me to create more stuff and record and edit and all that. It helps motivate me, so I'd be happy to hear it. Until next time, I've been Tomix, I currently am Tomix, and will hopefully continue to be Tomix, and I will see you in the next video.